We're going to start today by asking some very big questions. And of course, as usual, the answer to those questions are blowing in the wind. How many roads must a man walk down before you can call him a man? How many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? How many times must the cannonballs fly before they are forever banned? Feel free to sing along. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many years can a mountain exist before it is washed to the sea? How many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? And how many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many times must a man look up before he can see the sky? How many ears must one woman have before she can hear people cry? Yes, and how many deaths will it take till they know that too many people have died? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. One more time. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
Our opening words this morning are from Lynn Harrison. Committed to respond to the call of a wounded world, we join together this day with loving hearts, hands, and minds, embracing the interconnected web of water, air, and earth. We light a fire of sustaining hope, ever bright with love and justice. May we bring forth this day new wisdom, strength, and courage to create a new world, not of wealth, but of well-being. A world of new peace and abundance for all. As we give thanks for this earth, our shared and singular home, may we dedicate ourselves to its ongoing care, rising to the calls deep within us and all around us. May we respond today and always with courage and with love.
Nobody's young at heart anymore? No? I just wanted to talk about that this month we'll be exploring ideas about justice. We sometimes use the word fair to describe justice. I want to talk about being fair to our planet, and maybe our planet will be fair with us and allow us to live here for a long, long time, maybe your grandchildren. So, what was my concern? Well, I saw this picture here, and can you describe it? Do you know what it is? Yeah? And what's surrounding the boat? Yeah, there's a lot of it, isn't there? You can't see water, it's just trash. Well, yeah, maybe no, I think it's shadow. I think it's plastic as well. It's dark plastic. So, there's a lot of it around, isn't there? You know, we buy it and we use it. So how much plastic is there? Anybody guess? A lot. A lot. It's very difficult to think. But it's estimated by 8.3 billion tons of plastic has been produced to date. 8.3 billion tons. I don't know what that looks like, but I think it's a lot. However, as of 2015, approximately 6.3 billion tons of plastic waste has been generated. So that's a lot of waste. So only 9% of plastic is in fact recycled. And do you recycle at home? What do you recycle? Do you recycle plastic? And what about paper and things? Cardboard? Okay. So 79% of all the plastic is put into landfills and here. So that's a lot of plastic there. So when we put the plastic in the ground or around it, how long is it before it goes away? A long, long time. You know, when Mother Nature has a real good way of handling organic waste, you can imagine how difficult it would be if the leaves did not decompose. We'd be up to here in leaves, wouldn't we? Every year, more and more leaves. So here we've got a little thing there that said styrofoam cup. Takes 50 years to decompose, like a thing. And this, a nappy. Do you know what a nappy is? Pardon? It is. It's, you know, it's these English people that call diapers nappies, but it takes 450 years for them to decompose. But also, it takes 450 years for a plastic bottle to decompose. So that's a lot. So if you consider that plastics was only just developed prior to the Graduate film. Everybody knows about the Graduate film, you know, plastics is the beginning. So so it means that that's been around 50, 60 years. So every bit of plastic that we see in the world is original. None of it has disappeared. All of it is accumulated. Sometimes we recycle, but mainly not, and that's why the picture that I showed you was a little bit kind of frightening for me. So let's talk about drink bottles then. So 1 million, a big number, are bought every minute, or 20,000 per second. Now, if everybody looked around at this auditorium, look at how big it is. We could fill that with the people that bought the plastic bottles in 2.5 minutes. So it keeps on growing and growing and growing. And unfortunately, these islands, because you were talking about it, Jack, they've got these big islands in the ocean of trash and plastic, and it's in Pacific Ocean, it's in the Indian Ocean, everywhere. So, what do we do? Well, for plastic bottles, what do you think we should do? No, before that. What do you think? No, before that. We want to buy reusable bottles. You know, these plastic bottles, things. So, and then you can fill it yourself with filtered water or tap water. But if you can't do that, then you go and reuse the plastic bottle. Keep on filling that plastic bottle until it kind of... But finally, what you need to do is to recycle the plastic bottles. You need to put them in the recycling bin. The other thing there's a lot of, and we use quite often, is plastic bags. And this is one of my... Pardon? That's right, you were listening last time we spoke. So first of all, we don't want to use them. We want to use reusable bags, don't we? You know, and in fact, in the cafeteria, I've left some reusable bags for anybody to pick up. We've got a lot of reusable bags, so please use those. So, if you can't, if you are unable to use or you forgot the reusable bag, which we often do, it's often in the car or somewhere else, but it's never when we need it. We want to reuse our plastic bags, and as an instance, you noticed we collect food for the Bristol Food Bank. They like plastic bags because then they can give the people the food that is donated, and then finally you recycle the plastic bags. And where do we recycle them? In where? And where is it? In the supermarket. Have you seen those little those bins in the supermarket? Well, that means that all of that is pre-sorted, all of the plastic, so they can use the plastic, or they can recycle the plastic very easily. It's not mixed in with other things. So, what do you think? Are we all going to help with the... because the thing is that this plastic stuff is all over the place and it's not going away. It's just not going away. So please recycle, don't use it or whatever. I know you might think that it's not a big deal if you do it, but if everybody thought that way, we'd be using a lot more plastic. But so, thanks very much. Thank you.
selfish kind of love. It's time that I realize that there are some with no home and not a nickel to loan. Could it be really me pretending that they're not alone? A willow deeply scarred somebody's broken heart and a washed out dream. They follow the pattern on the wind, you see, 'cause they got no place to be. That's why I'm starting with me. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. And no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. No message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. Better make that change.
Good morning. And thank you, Avi. Always good to hear your music. If you're north of 65, as I am, you may remember Barry Goldwater and a speech he gave about that included the words, "Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice." Anybody remember that speech? Okay. That was sort of a rallying cry for conservatives back then, and sort of began the conservative movement, although Barry Goldwater would probably be considered a liberal today. But a lot of people don't know that a year earlier, Martin Luther King used the word extremism in another context, and that context was in defense of justice. Not surprisingly, he got a lot of heat because he used it in the context of civil rights, and civil rights were still in their early stages back then. And I'm going to read a letter that he wrote from the Birmingham jail. I'm not going to read the whole thing, just a part of it, in which he used that term. The letter was written on April 16, 1963. The Negro has many pent-up resentments and latent frustrations, and he must release them. So let him march. Let him make prayer pilgrimages to City Hall. Let him go on freedom rides and try to understand why he must do so. If his repressed emotions are not released in nonviolent ways, they will seek an expression through violence. This is not a threat, but a fact of history. So, I have not said to my people, get rid of your discontent. Rather, I have tried to say that this is normal, and healthy discontent can be channeled into the creative outlet of nonviolent direct action. And now this approach is being termed extremist. But though I was initially disappointed at being categorized as an extremist, I continued to think about the matter, and I gradually gained a measure of satisfaction from the label. Was not Jesus an extremist for love? Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Was not Paul an extremist for Christian gospel? And Abraham Lincoln, when he said, "This nation cannot survive half slave and half free." So the question is not, whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice? Perhaps the South, the nation, and the world are in dire need of creative extremists.
Get up, stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. Get up, stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. Most people think great God will come from the skies, take away everything and make everybody feel high. But if you know what life is worth, you will look for yours on earth. And now you see the light. Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight.
Bob Marley, was it not, Avi? Yes, I thought I got that Jamaican accent pretty well. It seems appropriate that we talk about justice in the same month that we celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday. Unfortunately, it's appropriate to talk about justice as President Tweet does his best to destroy the American judicial system. But enough has been said about the latter. We'll talk about the former now. A lot of people don't think of Martin Luther King and the law. He wasn't a lawyer, but he did a lot to influence the law. And there was an article published in the University of Minnesota Law School Journal that talked about this influence. Without the benefit of legal education or a survey of legal philosophy, Dr. Martin Luther King went into an historic debate in legal scholarship regarding the nature of law and the responsibility of citizens to obey it. King made a meaningful contribution to this jurisprudential discourse of his time by opening the discourse to a broader society and centering it on a critical issue of his day. Justice is a core aspect of our Unitarian Universalism principles and our sources of worship. It is in the second principle where we affirm justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And our second source of inspiration, which is words and deeds of prophetic women and men who challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. You can actually look at justice in three ways. One is restorative justice. That's where we try to repair something that has been harmed by a crime, for example. When victims and offenders and community members meet to decide how to do that, the results can be transformational. Distributive justice assumes that goods and services and wages and commerce are distributed evenly and fairly. Unfortunately, we have seen since probably the beginning of the Reagan administration, that is not the case, certainly with regard to wages. The inequity or the injustice of wages between the 1% and the rest of us, particularly people who are in the lower class economically, has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. I was reading the New Yorker last week, and there was an article about this hedge fund owner. And in 2015, he made $1.5 billion in 1 year. Not million, billion. And yet he still complained about paying too much in taxes. Then there's retribution justice, in which a system of criminal justice focuses more on punishment than on rehabilitation. And we have seen that all too often as many black males have been incarcerated, often for minor offenses and often for sentences far longer than they should have been. There was an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer last week, I think it was, about a priest who embezzled $500,000. He was sentenced to 8 months in prison. And the first thing I thought of was, if some 20-year-old kid, black kid from North Philly, stole $500,000, how many years do you think he would get in prison? My old colleague, Rose DeWolf, anybody remember Rose DeWolf, the columnist for she used to write for the Bulletin, but in her last days she wrote for the Inquirer, the Daily News, when I was the restaurant critic. And she once said to me, if they, meaning those kids in North Philadelphia, could steal with a pencil, they would. In an ideal world, the law should serve the ends of justice, but we know that isn't the case very many times. And it was even more so in Martin Luther King's time. And that's why he made fairness and the legal system itself of primary importance in his speeches and in his writings, just as I read about in his letter from the Birmingham jail. He used the law of the land to tell white people, hey, you're not living up to your own documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. You say these things in those documents, but you're not living up to them as far as black Americans are concerned. Of course, we have to remember that those documents were drafted by privileged white men. No women, and certainly no blacks, and certainly no American Indians. And it was a given when those documents were created that blacks and American Indians and women of any color were excluded. In his 1963 Dream speech, King used the metaphor of a bad check. He said, in a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. He went on to accuse the United States of being a moral deadbeat when it came to honoring its debts of justice, saying, it is obvious today that America has defaulted on its promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Now, he was smart enough to focus on economics, which involves justice as well, because things like freedom and fairness and those kinds of things in an abstract don't resonate with people as much as their pocketbooks. So if you just say to somebody, you are like a moral deadbeat because you bounced a check, most people, I think, would be humiliated if they bounced a check. And they can relate to that. The Emancipation Proclamation and the 14th Amendment promised meaningful freedom and justice for African Americans. In stating that all men are created equal, even the Declaration of Independence implied freedom for black men, though no such implications were made for women of any color. I think we tend to forget that women were just as excluded as African Americans were, and certainly African American women were the most excluded of all. That freedom was not fully realized for blacks even after the 14th Amendment and the Emancipation Proclamation, as we saw afterward decades of discrimination and segregation. And the same was true for women. After the 19th Amendment, when they got the right to vote, they were still denied equal rights with men in many areas, including and especially pay equity. The example of justice denied blacks even after they were given citizenship it was demonstrated in the 1896 Supreme Court decision that said that schools could be separate but equal. And this was the rallying cry for segregation. It's because they said, see, you can be in the back of the bus, you can be in your own schools, and they will still be equal. Well, of course they weren't. In 1954, that was overruled in Brown versus Board of Education, and that's when King actually began his career. Going back to that dream speech, King said, "Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds." By using the metaphor of a check, he was saying that he refused to believe that in a nation as wealthy as the United States, the richest, most powerful nation in the world, could not be fair to African Americans. Now, theoretically, justice, true justice, is applied equally, regardless of the parties concerned. For example, if you're a good man or woman, however you define that term, and you're a bad man or a woman, however you define that term, if the good man or woman owes the bad man money, he has to pay, regardless of the fact that what else this person has done, you still have to pay your debts. There's a movie that was out recently called Marshall. Anybody see that? About Thurgood Marshall? Nobody saw that movie. My wife and I are the only ones who saw it. That's why I stayed for about 3 days, I guess. It told the story of Thurgood Marshall. Everybody know who Thurgood Marshall was? Supreme Court Justice. First African American on the Supreme Court. And it told about his early days as a lawyer and he went around the country defending mostly African Americans against local judicial systems that were biased against them. And not just in the South, as a matter of fact. And most of the movie actually was taking place in Connecticut. And he defended this black man on a rape charge, even though he was pointed out to be an ex-con and that he abandoned his wife and child. The fact that he was that kind of a character didn't mean that he couldn't get justice. When King and others in the civil rights movement refused to obey unjust laws, many white people thought that they were being unjust by not obeying the laws. But King and others were reflecting a higher law, a moral law. And that's why they said these laws are unjust. We're not obeying these laws because they do not conform to a higher moral law. A friend of mine said when I was in my teens, he was a conservative and a Goldwater supporter. He said, how could Martin Luther King get the Nobel Peace Prize if he's in jail all these times? Well, he was in jail all those times protesting the injustice, just like people like Gandhi and others who have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize. Martin Luther King wrote, "An unjust law is a code inflicted upon a minority which that minority had no part in enacting or creating. Throughout the state of Alabama, all types of conniving methods are used to prevent Negroes from becoming registered voters, despite the fact that the Negro constitutes a majority of the population. Can any law set up in such a state be democratically structured?" So what he was saying was, not only is this law unjust on its face, but it was created without the vote of people who should have been legitimate voters. So, how do we seek justice without going to Don Corleone on his daughter's wedding? Well, one way is to be aware of things that are unjust. For example, on February 20th, the UN is having a World Day of Social Justice, and they're having a lot of events, and I'm sure you'll see things in the area and in schools about programs and seminars that deal with poverty, social and economic justice, and unemployment. And then there's the UUA itself. I don't know how many of you folks regularly go to the UUA website. Nobody. Nobody goes to the UUA website. Well, one. Okay, thank you. There's a lot of material there on not just social justice, but other things as well. And there's a very good statement of conscience about economic equity. The statement of conscience on economic inequality affirms that the economic system needs 19 different elements to make it a just society. And I'm not going to read all 19 of them, but one of them, for example, is equal pay for equal work, guaranteed minimum income for everyone, and a tax structure that adequately and fairly taxes wealthy corporations. Another area of injustice, and something that I'm particularly, and my wife is particularly concerned about, is public education. I don't know what the schools are like in this area, but in Philadelphia, they're really hurting. And one of the reasons that they're really hurting is that they're not getting funding from Harrisburg. And so there are a lot of organizations that you could get involved with that are trying to get Harrisburg to do its constitutional duty. By constitutional law, they are required to fund schools. And the reason I think this is so fundamental to justice is that if we don't teach these kids at this level, I tutor second graders at a public school in Philadelphia, then they're going to be less than full citizens in every respect, whether they have inadequate jobs, or whether they may depend on the state more than people who are well educated. So it hurts the entire country when those people are not well educated. Now, I know we've all been discouraged by what has happened in Washington in the last year, and Harrisburg for many years, it seems like. But I think we should take heart by some of the polls that have come out and some of the recent local elections in places like Wisconsin and Alabama. So I hope that you will think about volunteering for progressive candidates who will turn things around in the term of, with regard to economic justice and social justice. And if you can support them financially, all the better. One of the ways that my wife and I decided to spend our money after you-know-who got elected was to give a couple checks to the ACLU, and I have some of their programs that they're doing in Pennsylvania if anybody would like to take a look afterwards. And I don't mean necessarily just federal and state offices. Local offices are just important. School boards, city councils, county supervisors, and so forth. I have been in a funk since the 2016 election. I haven't been reading newspapers. It's been too depressing for me, but I vowed that in 2018 that was going to change and that I was going to become more active in seeking justice in some of the unjust things that have been happening in society. And I hope you all will do the same. May it be so.
Preacher man, don't tell me heaven is under the earth. I know you don't know what life is really worth. It's not all that glitters is gold. Half the story's been told. But now you see the light. Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Oh, yeah. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights.